Well, I just wanted to say that that of course this is one of the most important moments of the summer school, and as I will use a phrase of Patricia that is there with us, is a historical event. How you call them, Patricia? The historical conversations? I think you're muted. Let me unmute. Now, Patricia.
Historical, historical encounters.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So in the context of the table that Patricia did at the Apple, she organized these historical encounters, and I think this is a historical encounter when this ongoing conversation between Gloria and Maria, which has happened in previous summer schools and has been really very important, I would say, historically, to bring together these big legacies that they carry with them. And of course, as you have heard, they have been working with the major voices of Black and Chicana feminism, and so having them talk together is something really, really important. These two traditions of non-white feminism coming together to think together in the spirit of building coalitions. So with that very short introduction, I will mute my microphone and allow you, Maria, to start the session.
Okay, so as I was saying, folks, when we talked, we decided to have two parts that mesh very nicely together. In the first one, Gloria asked me, how about if we talked for about 15 minutes about our brands of feminism? So I want her to go first to find out what the brand means. Second part, yes, we are going to devote to actually living the re-existence. So I'll read a little bit that I translated for Gloria from Albana Chinte, from a piece that appears in this collection that was put together in Argentina in the editorial, what is the editorial called? El Signo, that's that. And it's very much about, you know, they print very lovingly things from decoloniality. And so the book is called Creative Practices of Re-Existence, is in Spanish, and the piece itself is called From Resistance to Re-Existence, towards a praxis, the colonial practice of being. Yeah? So that will be the second part, but I think it will mesh very nicely with the first one. So, what's your brand of feminism?
All right. But before I go there, I thought it would be good if I would position myself a little bit, and then I'll get into my brand of feminism. So, as Rolando was saying before the break, it is a very important to be conscious of one's positioning, that we do not speak from nowhere. We do not do the God trick, as Donna Haraway would say. We speak from specific positioning. So that is what I'm going to talk about. Okay, so my family came to the Netherlands in 1951 when I was 1 year old. And in hindsight, I think we went from a middle-class existence in Suriname, then we became very poor in the Netherlands, and then my family built itself up again to become middle class. So, excuse me. How did this come about? In 1951, the Netherlands was still the imperial power in Suriname, one of its colonies in the West. And my father was a police officer. And after working for 6 years as a police officer, he had reached the rank of inspector of police. He was entitled to 6 months of furlough, of leave with his family in the mother country. So this was then part of one's working conditions, that your travel to the Netherlands would be paid. So here are my parents, 5 children, of which I'm the youngest, and we go to the Netherlands by boat. And my father wanted to study law in Amsterdam. He had started studying Latin on his own in Suriname, and so he enrolled at the University of Amsterdam. Then in the course of these 6 months, they decided that they wanted to stay in the Netherlands because of the possibilities for education that they didn't have in Suriname. Then my father had to go back to Suriname to serve out his contract, to sell our house and our stuff. And that took much longer than they had counted on. So at a certain moment, my mother was alone with her 5 kids. And she had very little income. We were very poor. I remember that my brothers had to go and bring back bottles to the store in order to make some money. So that has really imprinted me, that poverty of my early life. I've recently written a piece in response to Hazel Carby's beautiful book, Imperial Intimacies, Life Between Two Islands, really beautiful, beautiful book. And she asked me to write a response from my positioning. Hazel Carby is a feminist of color coming from the UK, has lived in the US for a long time. And she's talking about her youth in the UK. And she asked me to respond from my positioning. And so I've written this piece, Families Navigating Empire. And so we were one of the first Surinamese families to live in the Netherlands, because before that time, single people came, single men and single women. So how was it growing up in the 50s in the Netherlands? We didn't have a discourse really to speak about race. We thought of ourselves as brown. We saw ourselves as different. But at the same time, there was also strong pressure to assimilate, to be even better than the Dutch. So one consistent message my parents gave us was that we were smarter, we were more beautiful, we were more hospitable than the Dutch. It was very much the case that at that time, especially, we brought people home, our classmates, they could eat with us. My mother never cooked for 8 people, as we were then, because I had a younger brother when I was 10. She never cooked for 8 people, but also for other people who might come along. that was totally un-Dutch. I have, it's like growing up with double consciousness. You have to know your own culture, but you also know white Dutch dominant culture, in which you are asked before dinner, for instance, how many potatoes are you going to eat, so that nothing superfluous is going to be there, or how many slices of bread do you want to eat. That's totally not how we were, and that was very consciously present in us. So there is this this dual messaging that we got during our growing up. On the one hand, to assimilate; on the other hand, do not assimilate, because we have better habits. We are better. So there was also a gendered regime operative in my family of origin, in that it was more important for boys to study and to excel. And the expectation was that we as girls would get married. And so studying wasn't that important. But from the time I was very young, when I was 9 years old, I knew I didn't want an existence like my mother. I wanted to be a writer. I was always reading. I would hide myself in our house. We had a very large house at some point. After my father had graduated as a lawyer, we moved to Nijmegen, and we had a very big house. And so there were always rooms where I could hide and read books and kind of be outside of the things that were expected of me. I shunned female tasks. Okay, so now I'm 18 years old, and I decide after high school that I want to go to the US for 1 year. And I went to a small village called Normal, Illinois, where I met Black people for the first time. In my high school, I was a senior in high school, and there were 1,400 students in this high school, and there were about 5 Black students, and I befriended them. And one of my friends took me one night to a talk that Jesse Jackson, the collaborator of Martin Luther King, who had died, who had been murdered just a month before. Jesse Jackson came to town to speak, and at the entrance of the auditorium, there were all these Black brothers who were saying, white people sit in the back, Black people sit in front. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who I was and where I was supposed to fit into this system. But where I was with my friend Linda, and she went to the front, so I accompanied her. So that is the moment that I realized that I was Black. I didn't have a term for it before. Lots of things happened in that year that raised my consciousness, and I've realized that I've later made my profession out of this, out of untangling what is happening with race, with gender, with class, with sexuality in this moment. A very important moment also was the prom, when one has to find a date. Well, this date has to be a man, self-evidently at the time. In my case, this also had to be a Black man, who were in short supply. So all kinds of things happened, and I've later only been able to untangle and unpack that moment. But it was a very influential year for me, and it is also important to take from this that anti-racism came into my life before feminism, because I picked up anti-racism in the United States. After I came back, I studied anthropology at the University of Amsterdam. And I was, of course, interested in reading about Black anthropologists, about Black studies, about African American culture. None of that happened. That simply wasn't available. A class full of white students, all the teachers were white. The closest that I could come to anything that had to do with being Black was the Boas School in anthropology. Franz Boas, a very venerable anthropologist who had a Jewish German guy who had fled from Germany to the United States and became a professor at Columbia. He started the school, the Boas School. And I became interested in the work of Melville Jean Herskovich, who wrote about Black culture in the Americas, about matrifocal families. This is also the time that I read about the Moynihan report that Spillers is also talking about in her article. Feminism was just rising towards the end of the 70s. It became a presence in the Netherlands. And although feminism played a part among the students, these were all white students, so I didn't feel very at home in those circles. I was much more active in anti-colonial circles of students who wanted independence for Suriname and the Dutch Antilles. So feminism to me didn't speak to my position. It was mostly about gender equality, equal rights from a very reductionist position, a white position. Later, after I finished my studies, I became a civil servant, first for the national government, then for the municipality of Amsterdam, where I wrote the anti-racism policy paper. This is the time, the early 80s, of the first anti-racist wave in the Netherlands. And I was hired to write the first anti-racism policy paper. This is, I am afraid, the story of my life, that I'm always walking in front of the music, because this report, like later reports that I have written or co-written, they tend to disappear in very deep drawers. There's a moment when there is an incredible attention to anti-racism, and then it dies down again. In this same period, when white feminism was so dominant and not at all interested in hearing about the perspectives of Black migrant and refugee women, the latter groups got together and formed their own groups. And I, together with my South African friend, Tanya, took the initiative to found a group of Black lesbians called Sister Outsider, after the book of essays written by Audre Lorde. This is also the middle of the 80s. And we invited Audre to come to the Netherlands, which she did twice, when she was staying in Berlin over the summer to get treatment. She came to the Netherlands a couple of times, and it is through Audre that I learned how to practice intersectionality, how to think gender and race and class and what have you together. Okay. After being a civil servant, I decided that I wanted to go back to school, and that there was nothing that that I could look forward to learning in the Netherlands. I wasn't interested in what was on offer here, so I went again to the United States. I went to UCLA, and there I met people like Kimberly Crenshaw, who was an assistant professor at the time. And we were in a group together of students and junior faculty who talked about intersectionality. That was also an incredibly important time to me. I did field work in those years between 1987 and 1992. When I was doing my PhD, I did a year and a half of field work in Suriname. And after many, many years, the final product of that period came out, which is The Politics of Passion. It came out in 2006. It is a study of the ways in which Afro-Surinamese working class women construct their sexuality. And there's a lot more to be said about that, but I won't take that time now to do it. But it has been an incredibly important text. And my work has in the United States really been vital in introducing a way of thinking, a way of knowing from the inside about what it means to be a sexual person, a sexual subject, a female subject in the Black diaspora. Okay, yes. I want to fast forward now to what my feminism looks like. And I was looking up an article. I thought of an article that I had written in 2004 in the European Journal of Women's Studies, in which I characterize the kind of feminism that we should transmit to further generations. The article is called Still Crazy After All Those Years. And in it, I kind of invoke, I do not do that literally because that article wasn't out then, but I really like what Flavia Jordan has said about intersectionality. My feminism will be intersectional or it will be bullshit. That has really spoken to me, that motto. So what are the characteristics of the feminism that I find worthwhile to transmit to coming generations? That is, first, that it be intersectional. Secondly, I value transnationality. That is, that we do not look with blinkers on, but that we place a situation in a much wider transnational context. I was inspired there by the work of Jackie Alexander and Chandra Mohanty. Third, I think feminism should be interdisciplinary. The history of the genealogy of disciplines is so arbitrary. What one studies in one particular discipline, it is ridiculous to keep to those arbitrary boundaries. So I think interdisciplinarity is an important good. It should be relational feminism. That is to say that not only should it be, we should be able to make comparisons, to make our outlook wider than just one particular phenomenon at hand. The fifth characteristic is that it should be reflexive, which means that one should be self-reflexive, that is taking how one is positioned by these various grammars that are ordering ourselves and society. One should be cognizant of those grammars and be critical, of course, and be aware of how they influence ourselves and our knowledge production. I didn't then write in decoloniality in this article from 2004 because I'm a latecomer to decoloniality. I met Rolando and Rosalba in 2016 when I was the chair of the Diversity Commission at the University of Amsterdam, and we did a very elaborate study of what is happening at the University of Amsterdam. There was an occupation going on, and with 5 professors and 13 research assistants, we did a thorough research on what is happening at the University of Amsterdam. How come the curricula are wide? How come almost all the teachers are wide? That knowledge is very monolithically regarded and transmitted. And so we produced a report that is intersectional and decolonial. And it again, like I said earlier, what happens to my work? It disappeared in the deepest drawer at the University of Amsterdam. And it is not as if we hadn't foreseen some of the things that have happened afterwards, like last week, another white male teacher, was accused of sexually abusing and harassing his female students. And that is a big scandal at the moment. We have written about those things and what needed to happen, to no avail. This ties in with my another rather groundbreaking book that I have written, which is White Innocence, Paradoxes of Colonialism and Race, in which I ask how is it possible for a nation like the Netherlands that has been an empire for 400 years to imagine that that will not have left traces in its history, its language, the way we look at ourselves and at the other. And the report we did for the University of Amsterdam shows that the University of Amsterdam is like a microcosm of Dutch society. But anyway, I was so lucky to meet Rolando and Rosalba then, and so we have been, since that time, I have been introduced to decoloniality, which has become also an important home to me. And even though I'm also still learning the discourse and its history and the different iterations it has gone through, I'm really very happy to have come in touch with decoloniality. Finally, I will say something brief about the questions that I'm induced to think about also by the work of Maria about gender and coloniality. So first of all, I'm convinced that when we look at it from a history of consciousness angle, the grammar of race precedes that of gender, of sexuality, and of class, since race is the sine qua non of coloniality. And it not only precedes these other grammars of difference, but it infuses them with meaning. So this is the angle under which I look at gender and coloniality. What I'm not sure about is, as Oyeronke Oyewumi says, that pre-Middle Passage in Africa, that we didn't have gender. I have the feeling that we did have gender, but it was differently, it had different content. I looked at gender contemporaneously in the 90s when I was doing research in Suriname, and I came to the conclusion on the basis of that anthropological work that there is gender, but it is an open system, a system of possibilities. It is not the binary, hierarchical Western gender system. What I'm sure about is that what the reading I gave you, which is a book review I wrote of this wonderful book by Omiseke Natasha Tinsley, which is in this Transgender Quarterly of 2020. I review her book Aisili's Mirrors, which I loved, because it is a further step at the intersection of gender, sexuality studies, African diaspora studies. It looks at the figure of Aisili, or Ersili, the Loa of femininity. So she goes, as it were, into Aisili, and she gives us an understanding of how Aisili operates in those who are carried by this goddess. So Natasha Tinsley speaks of creative gender and sexualities in the African diaspora. And that is what I also see in front of me when I look at Suriname. So she taps different, Natasha Tinsley, Omiseke Natasha Tinsley, taps different ways of knowing through the ancestors. She taps into that which has survived, which has come from Africa, and that Black people have been able to belabor in their new circumstances in the New World, in this case in Haiti. So what is clear to me is that it was profitable for the colonizers to evict Black people from their gender system. It was profitable economically, sexually, morally, in all kinds of ways. And that against the grain, this own gender system that people had taken with them from Africa has been able to survive. Not everywhere equally, to the same extent. It also depended on the circumstances in different colonies. But I think Suriname and Haiti, and probably Brazil, are among the very strong exceptions of what happens when the oppressed are able to hold on to their own worldviews, also in the domain of gender and sexuality. So this is my brand of feminism, Maria.
Okay. You know, I want to have a conversation, and now it's almost 11:40. So let us just skip the second part. I'm sorry that we have to, but we have to. So I just want to begin maybe saying very briefly about what you call the brand, you know, by thinking about the gender question. And, you know, I have reasons for this, you know, and the attention to the reasons is overwhelmed by the familiarity with which people have come to use the word gender, which did not exist as such till 1978. It's like a very new thing. Why would we think of all oil and think with gender? Well, anyway, but for next time, you do have a reading, yes, that hopefully will clarify this issue. But I want to say that there is gender, yes, in the nation state. Gender and the nation state are tied. It isn't any social arrangement, any political arrangement, any economic arrangement that has gender, because people haven't always organized themselves in nation states. And the nation state is emphatically heterosexual and heterosexualist. And it's not just normatively heterosexual and heterosexist. It reduces the woman, what is called woman, yes, to a womb and a vagina. That is, to the biological sexual differences, and then, you know, assigns roles to them in accordance with that. So, you know, it's easy to go anywhere with that in mind and then say, you know, in such and such a place, the sexual differences, and now what are the roles? And then you have a gender system, and that's not a system. That is just, you know, a putting together of the biological with one's own making up of the social, political, and economic. I mean, it's polemical in a way, but I think I am, you know, important to me as a woman of color in the world for various reasons. But one of the important things is that this understanding of gender that is brought everywhere then emphasizes the reduction of women to vaginas and womb. So now let me begin with my own thing. That was just for the end of what Gloria, you were saying. So we began the conversation. So, you know, first, when I was thinking about my being in this world, I had a very happy childhood. I didn't have anything else happy, but my childhood was great. I was not a girl. I was not a boy. I was agile. I was powerfully physical. I, lived in the country. I went horseback riding without a saddle. I, risked myself in doing all kinds of possibilities because I thought my body was in tune with my intentions. So many years later, when I was in my 50s, I sat down with my mom and I said, Mama, I want to talk to you about my gender formation. And of course, I had to explain what that was. And when she understood what it was, she became like in a state of grace, happy, that she was going to talk to me about this. So when I asked her, Mama, why is it? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I cannot see anything. I only see a screen that says Zoom. Okay, so Mama, why
Maria,
is it? Yes?
Maria, if you go to the top where it says window.
Window.
Yes, so you have at the top bar a little menu that says window.
A little menu that says window. I have all of these firuletes, and then there is an M, there is a firulete, little squares, another little squares, something that looks like an elephant.
Okay, click the little squares.
Gallery view?
No, that's not it. Little squares. No, that's not it.
What do you have? Just read to us because you have to see us.
You mean the square that is between the minus sign and the X?
No, on the top where you have the Zoom window, where it says Zoom,
yeah.
At the top, then you will have a menu that says window, and then you will be able to switch to the window where we are.
I don't have anything that says window.
And you have little squares that say speaker view or gallery view?
No, it's like as if I'm going to get myself in again. Okay, open Zoom. Okay, now what I see is you very little on the left. Okay, and then this is on top of something else. But anyway, what do I do now? Here it doesn't have, select a window, that?
Yes.
And it says restore, that? Let me see what happens now. No, the only thing that is open is closing. Okay, tiki tiki, tiki tiki, tiki tiki. No, I think I just continue because, it's a pity because I want to see Gloria. But I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see Gloria right now.
You see me? Hooray.
Yes. I see Gloria and Patricia. That's what I see.
Okay.
So I asked my mom, Mama, why is it that when we went to the theater, you did my sister's hair in curls, but not mine? And my mom said, oh, that's easy. It's because you were a boy. And I said, Mama, like a boy? No, Hita, you were a boy. You were up in the trees and you had such good memory. So anyway, that was part of how I lived. Yes, I lived in my body powerfully. And I experienced the reduction. Slowly, I experienced the reduction. And for me, sex was horrible. Why was it horrible? Because entering into a sexual encounter, it couldn't be not within the confines of normalcy. So I lived the sexual impossibility of being the being of physical and sentient, powerful possibility in sex. And I just thought of this as a very important part of the restrictions, the terrible restrictions. Well, the second thing was that I was put in an insane asylum, and it was because it was thought that I was, sexually out of control or something. And I was prude, but I wanted to speak about it. And my speech was confused by my father with, I had too much sex. Instead, sex was painful, was a failure every time, in the sense of I couldn't enter into it, whoever it was, but it was only with this person. So anyway, I was put in the insane asylum. I was given insulin shock treatments without any supervision for months, till I almost, I went into a coma for 10 days. And after that, they changed into giving me powerful psychotics instead of that treatment. I learned an enormous amount in the insane asylum about who I was, enormous amount. And I learned it from the women who were there. It was an experience where I was, I think, if the word true to myself makes sense, true to a self that was a possible self, that was different from this reduction. So when I came to the US, I didn't come because I wanted, the apple pie. I didn't want even to study, but I did study because that was the ticket, because I was raped constantly by this person. My father was constantly beating me up. And so I decided I needed to get out, but we didn't want to go to the street and become a prostitute. That's what I was terribly afraid of losing my life that way. So it was a time, 1967, at the University of Buenos Aires. Many people were leaving, and many were leaving for the States. I investigated who would give me money, and finally UCLA gave me money, so I went and studied philosophy of all things, which I didn't, particularly, it wasn't because I had a deep interest in it. I just studied it because it was one thing to study. So anyway, I finished my BA very quickly because they counted a lot of what I had studied already, and I went to Wisconsin to study for my PhD, and I went there because this guy was teaching there who believed things that I couldn't think were possible to believe, and I thought I need to. This seems to me very much at the core of this society. And I want to understand it, and I want to, see whether it makes sense or not. So I wrote my dissertation against it. The feminism I encountered in graduate school, but I had already in UCLA made my commitment to Chicanas and Chicanos, and walking in the campus to Black power, who didn't pay, of course, any attention to anybody who wasn't Black. And I completely dissociated myself from the counterculture, which was absolutely everywhere. So when I became a feminist, I became a feminist in two ways from the movement. When feminism was a movement, you know, a movement that moved. After a while, it didn't move ever again. It was conferences. It was conferences. It was, you know, closed meetings, power struggles, and whatever. But there were no movement. So what there was, you know, was people thinking, people writing, you know, and for women of color, our insertion in the universities was finding each other and finding a space where we could do that. Because in the National Women's Studies Association, and all these women who were women of color and thought about women of color feminisms, that possibility, you know, could meet each other. You know, and since from the beginning, I decided I'm not going to go do anything other than women of color presentations, you know, meetings, whatever it is that we have. That is, for me, going to the US was finding a place where race was recognized. While in my society, it was not named, it was constantly, you know, thrown in my face, but there was no way of saying, yes, of speaking. And I know that, you know, my almost naked brown body, you know, up in the trees, yes, was not a white body. It was clear to me. You know, it was clear to me that my family, when my aunt, we would go to a birthday or something, or you know, and then we would go with her, and she would say, "Here come the Indians." You know, we were all together. So when I came to the US, I thought, oh, you know, this is an interesting thing for me, you know. So anyway, when I then got a job, yes, I came. I was a time, yes, that parallel to that, I came to Voice as a woman of color. For me, writing was very, very difficult. And, you know, because I had been taught in graduate school to occupy, to inhabit the universal person. And I felt like a mimic. I felt like a fraud. I couldn't say what I wanted to say. So I thought that in writing letters, I wrote philosophical letters. And so I began writing like that. So, at Carleton, where I was teaching, I formed all these, you know, people together things. So we had a group, Radical Folk, you know, with students, and, you know, one teacher would come, and then another one that came later. And it was great, you know, people could ask anything. And so they would ask, what's wrong with liberalism? You know, and so everybody would talk, you know, and then we had nice things, even though it's too complicated to explain. But, you know, we investigated each department, what was taught in the country, what were the things that were not taught. And then we presented each department with all these documentations, asked for a meeting, and then ask for justifications for why is it that they excluded all these other knowledges. We took 10 years to do this. At a certain point, things became really over the top for me. We had organized a strike, And out of the 1,500 students that the school had, 1,000 students were up in the school hill, all together. And, the few people of color that Canton had were at the front. So when I think of women of color, I have always thought of them as not reduced to wombs and vaginas. And I always have thought myself like that. Even when I'm being beaten, blocked, reduced, as an embodied being, I think of ourselves as spirited, as thinking, and as having these possibilities, that if you reject the norming, which I rejected when I was a kid, rejecting the norming, you also reject other ways of norming. And you see how central to the nation state are all of these ways of norming the body, the mind, our tasks, every little thing that we do. So let me see if I forget anything that I wrote here. Yeah, I want to say a little bit about the popular education, because I think popular education to me is a very important way. And I think when I look at what Rosalba was showing to us, a lot of it is popular education of a very creative and wonderful sort. And so it's a way of taking what the transformation, transforming. Popular education is transforming. So I went to New Mexico when I met Miles Horton, and he founded the Highlander Folk School. And so there, people are, their ancestors have lived there since the colonies. They were the northernmost colonies. And then, of course, the Pueblo Indians have been there for a much, much longer time. The work there is, one thing that I think is important is to think of the relations among people in a history of encounter and of resistance to encounter that doesn't have names that I impose from the outside. I need to know how they think about it, but then I can think with them about what is it that is, assimilated, or that it is transculturated, that we need to think about together. Okay, and I think of that as a very significant part of my feminism. That is relationality, as Rolando has as central, is also central to my feminism, instead of thinking about gender. So maybe now we could talk a little bit, yes, and to each other, and then open it up, yes. So I think I went to the States by myself. Yes, I was getting out of extreme violence, So I was in a mood, I think, that it was a kind of warrior mood, So it was great that the Chicanas came and talked to me, and they thought to me as a mestiza, and I recognized certainly myself as a mestiza, and that word came into my mouth for the first time to me, as something that applied to me, and it applied to me in a way that I felt this is great, but I wasn't going to think of it and live it like that. The same I did with the feminism. Maybe a significant part of my feminism has been to keep on digging. It's, so my going from women of color feminism to decolonial feminism has been a keep on moving and digging and thinking and finding and thinking with other women. I have spent most of my time in and outside of the classroom, in activism, in popular education with folks of color. Learning from them, has kept me trying to get my voice, to be as clear as possible, as I can make it, recognizing that there are things that need names because they don't have names. But I think I have always thought with others and among others, that without that, it's not really, it's a fantasy, Yeah. Okay, so let's talk. I'm sorry. I keep on talking instead of shutting up. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing, Maria. It is beautiful how you render your life and how you have seen such difficult moments, but from which you have emerged really strong and in the company of other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm struck by the fact that we have both studied at UCLA. I wasn't aware of that before.
Oh, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Right. I did my PhD at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, similarly, I think that your trajectory, is, I think these are the familiar trajectories, but they're always important when the person tells us about it, right?
Yeah,
because it's in the trajectory we see details, right?
yeah.
That turns that one takes, sometimes the right, sometimes the wrong turn.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I want to know this from you, yes? To me, one of the prices that I have paid has been to become too angry. It's difficult for me not to be angry.
Yeah.
And I would like to be some of the time not angry at all. And now that I'm so sick, and I don't know whether I'll be here next time, but maybe I will. Yes,
Yeah.
I am practicing not angry. I am practicing not angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a good thing. And I don't know whether anger has been something that has become part of my personality. I don't know if you feel that, or I mean, you seem a lot calmer than I am.
I think anger can be a terrific force to drive you forward, to act, to want to change things. And I think I have anger too, which drives me forward. Sometimes I think, look, you're retired. Why are you working 7 days a week? You know, but I'm still doing it. And I think there's anger underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, maybe what you find in those communities with whom you work, I find it in my circle of friends who are everywhere, but I make it a point to visit my friends. I go regularly, for instance, to Jackie in Tobago. I really need that part in my life too, where there is friendship, where I feel unconditionally accepted, where we work on the land. There is a very strong spiritual spirit. So I try to offset the anger, which is also there, with doing things that are healing to me. And I hope, you know, that you find that in working with the communities in New Mexico, do you?
To some extent, you know, I do visitation every day. When I'm there, I visit with people, and it's always good, and it's important to the project, but it's also very good for me. You know, people are you know, like one of my neighbors has butterflies everywhere. You know, so I asked her, when was the first time that you had, you know, like the butterflies, and what do they mean to you? And she said, oh, I was a little girl, and it made me so, it made me peaceful. You know, so that's something that I can take with me from her. And, you know, every time I see a butterfly thing, I think, oh, maybe I should get it for her. Some, because she has so many to put some more, but it surely made me, you know, take her with me, you know.
Yeah.
But what I mean is the anger as a part of my personality that, I mean, some of the time it makes me intimidating to people, and I don't like it. But anyway, I know, I think that our feminisms are certainly different. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the intersectionality as a, I mean, not just Black women, all women of color who have thought about being women of color have put together race and gender, you know, very differently. But the intersection as a theorized way of looking at the world, yes, has been crucial, yes. But I think it doesn't quite give us the coalition, you know. And so the move towards the coalitional needs, I find it in the decolonial, you know.
Yeah.
The move towards the coalitional. Crenshaw does see coalition that is inside the groups. You know, so coalition between men and women of color. But, you know, it's very problematic, that coalition, because of the situation in the society, makes it that the communities feel that the women are putting the community in danger. You know how it is. You know, and when, you know, women write, publish, and then all of a sudden it's putting the community in danger by speaking against men.
Right.
You know, so, you know.
But can you explain to me what it is in the decolonial that facilitates the move towards the coalitional? Because I feel that you know, when I look at the Netherlands in the 80s, we see a moment when Black migrant and refugee women get together and form coalitions and make an analysis that is proto-intersectional, that is looking at what do we have in common with each other. It is the women who are doing that, not the men. The government has put in place a structure where people are subsidized vertically by their nationality, Surinamese, Antilleans, Turkish, Moroccan, get their separate money. And the men stick to that structure, but it is the women who get together and who develop a joint analysis. So I see the coalitional occurring under those circumstances, while nobody has ever heard of the decolonial yet. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I think that people have formed coalitions, you know, without any theorizing. Theorizing doesn't, forming coalitions doesn't mean theorizing. People have formed coalitions, and coalitions are often, yes, often coalitions of self-interest, of common self-interest. But there are commonalities, yes, in situations of danger that lead people to be coalitional, and many other kinds of situations. So coalitions are not that uncommon, yes. They tend not to endure, yes. They tend not to be communal, yes. Mm-hmm. A communal coalition is a different kind of thing. Yeah. So when in the piece that Achinte wrote, he explains Husserl's position about the exteriority, the being in the exteriority, that is the other, you know, the other to the white colonial dominator, yes. That other is indagating him or herself, is that is asking of himself to work against his or her negation. Yes, so that those are theoretical works from him. Yes, mm-hmm. So if we look at the situation of people in coalition and look at whether they, not us, they understand themselves as this exteriority in the, you know, maybe as I do it as in another reality, you know, being seen as persons by those who occupy that reality, who have and developed, you know, different ways of living that are enabling them, you know, to be and to be in the deterrent. Then I'm thinking decolonially, mm-hmm. Right? So the conditional there, yes, is people form coalitions. Yes, how do they understand them from the inside? Yes, and how they understand it, you know, maybe at several levels of understanding. I think the colonial is in some ways a meta level of understanding. Mm-hmm. Yes, people do, people think, and then people reflect on what it is that is they're doing. So in that respect, I am, you know, a decolonial feminist, even though feminism is for me problematic. Yes, because the femme in the feminism is the woman that I think is certainly not one. You know, so, you know, I think white women have tried to make us all women, yes, and I reject that fundamentally, you know.
Mhm.
So what are our possibilities? Well, you know, experience is helpful, yes, because she doesn't want gender, yes. That's not what the path, yes. But at the same time, you know, she finds that a lot has to be created, yes, from that flesh that is ground zero.
Right.
So I don't know, yes. I mean, the differences between us, I think, are very important in the fact that, you know, I think in this philosophical way, yes.
I know, yeah.
And that philosophical way is a way that I do think with other people in New Mexico in that way, but I go much more slowly, and also I unpack everything I say.
Right.
You know,
right.
but you know, trying to find in them, yes, I pay a lot of attention to find that resistance that I speak, you know, in conversation over, you know, fried chicken or something, you know. So while in your case, yes, the theoretical is I think you don't render the world that way, right? Yes, you think about the world in these deep ways, but also they are very concrete, you know, embodied, personal, yes, attentive to people's ways, and yeah, you know, you don't encounter the decolonial philosophically very often, right?
Yeah. This is true. I think, you know, that we are formed by our different disciplines, and that is influencing the kinds of questions we ask and the kinds of ways we go about answering them. And so clearly that is different in our cases. I'm an anthropologist. I'm sensitive to other kinds of data and questions than you as a philosopher are.
Yeah, and you can see for me, when I encountered intersectionality, as intersectionality in Crenshaw, I had encountered the interlocking, I had already written about it. But when I encountered it and then it became big, yes, you know, I thought a lot about it philosophically, yes. And I found that there were excellent things, and then, but also that it wasn't enough for us. That's what I felt. It wasn't enough. You know, that is, the intersection gives you a position. It doesn't give you what it is. What are we going to be? What do we want to be? Intersectional is not enough as something to be, right? In the world. Yes. But we are intersection.
But I find that intersectionality lends itself very well to being extended to subjects and themes that originally Crenshaw didn't have in mind, but that it is a very fruitful way of approaching reality and analyzing it. I see it as a theory that opens and deepens complexity in looking at the world and at different phenomena.
Well, that is great, yes. But that means that in doing that, you do take intersectionality as a point of departure. It permits you, that complexity, it permits you to go elsewhere, to go bigger, right? In your analysis. You're not stopped, right?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually practice adding stuff to my intellectual landscape all the time. And so I find it really interesting what is going on now, for instance, when people are trying to think intersectionality together with Afro-pessimism. I'm not interested in that project so much. I'm interested in thinking intersectionality and decoloniality.
Yeah, that's great. You know, I mean, I also see. I mean, certainly in the book in Suriname, you are so beautifully present. You know, that book taught me so much. It's a fantastic book. You know, the whiteness book also. You know, the world is shows. Yes. So I find in both cases that the intersectional, is it a book, are they books where intersectionality lives? Yes. Yes. But, you know, what makes them theoretically the books they are, yes, is you go much further. You know, so I like to think with you about that much further when you are thinking decolonially.
Okay, all right.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, shall we open it up for?
Yes, absolutely, yes. Yes.
More discussion with the class?
Yes.
You can also keep on talking. This session is about you talking and not listening.
No, but it would be nice to have conversation with other people about what we said. But anyway, you know, I think with Adolfo's understanding of re-existence that you pointed out to us in the title of the session, you know, I found that this passage, how do I get it? Let me see if yes, here it is. So let me read the passage, yes? Yeah. So it's my translation, and it isn't, you know, a careful translation, just a translation so that Gloria can have it. So he says, the praxis of re-existence, so it's the praxis of re-existence, consists in confronting all the forms of domination, exploitation, and discrimination through actions. Actions that lead us to build a consciousness of being, of feeling, of doing, of thinking from a concrete life place of enunciation. They are actions that conduce to decolonizing being, its imaginaries, language, fantasy, its creative capacity to recuperate ontologically, to insist in building the right to occupy a place in society with dignity, to impede renouncing being what one must be and not being what is imposed as being. In this measure, the praxis is this and nothing else, understood as the praxis of shortening distances, a coming near to proximity. So what I read in it, yes, that it would be good for us to think about was this these actions, yes, that confront domination, but as we are going through these actions, yes, we are taken, yes, to the consciousness of being. rather than being had, or feeling rather than being, objects of doing rather than being passive, thinking rather than being without minds, and doing that from a concrete place of enunciation. And I think it's a very nice thing for us to go through this exercise, yes, to think of actions that we have engaged in that do this, yes, and they can be little things, yes, and he is thinking about decolonizing being, its imaginaries, language, fantasy, creative capacity, and all of these things. So I think it's a good exercise. I mean, I'm thinking here as a popular educator. Can you see? Yeah, that I found this passage as useful for this.
Yeah. And so what would be some of the things you would say to this question?
Oh yeah, I wrote some. I put them somewhere here with dots. Let me see if I find the dot here, dots. Okay, so one thing, the first thing I already said, yes? So I began writing, yes? And I found the writing that I was asked to do as universal a form of domination.
Yeah.
And so I confronted it through an action that brought me to a consciousness of a place of enunciation that had to do with writing in letters, in the epistolae.
Okay.
Yes,
okay. Yeah.
Where I could think, I could think and think and think and think. And
Okay.
with this other thing, it cost me to think anything, right? So that's one example.
Right.
Then I was in a CR group, a consciousness raising group with all these white women. There were a couple of women of color, and myself, like other women of color who were doing CR, at some point, yes, we left. And those actions, yes, that action of living, the CR put us women of color together. Was one of the things that put us together.
Right.
It's like we're living together, living here, and finding each other. Why?
Yeah.
We're finding each other because we're building this consciousness being from this place of enunciation of women of color, right? Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking like right at this moment, what is happening in the Netherlands with the Black Lives Matter movement, that really spoke to me, the things I'm doing in that framework as moving towards, acting towards living a life of dignity, not only for myself, but for the entire group of people of color and Black people. Like we have just started a group, just today, before this meeting started today, we came up with a name for ourselves, for Black women. And we calling ourselves Black Jacobins. So the female form of Jacobin, Jacobins, which is a female name also. And we are going to support this Black Lives Matter movement by calling meetings, talking with people about what they see as most vital issues to be addressed by the anti-racist movement. And we also thought we should definitely, I'm going to need Rosalba's help and your help with that too, to think through what it means to start a weekend school in which Black people will be schooled in anti-racist thought, because we haven't learned that here. Where would you learn it? It's not in school, not in the university.
Yes.
So we feel we need to do the schooling of our own people.
Yes.
And I will be happy to talk with you and Rosalba about that. How to
Yes, this is fantastic. The way you said it, what it is, fantastic. And I would love to participate.
Yes. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, as we are beginning, sorry.
I don't know who wanted to speak.
Rolando, did you speak?
No, continue. I think Rosalba said.
I just said fantastic.
Fantastic. Yeah, and we are beginning this school, with the building and everything. And so we're thinking also about this formation, yes, of young people that is taught nowhere. Yes, yeah, and certainly anti-racism is a central part of it. Yeah. So, doing these things, in different places, we can think together.
Yes, that will be lovely.